Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Avatar news update video. So we've got a couple things to talk about here, and I'll start with this one because it's the most up in the air. We probably won't be spending too much time on this one, but it's this interesting Instagram story post that Bryan, co-creator of Avatar, posted up on Instagram. What it is a short video where he starts out by focusing in on the corner of his screen, where you can clearly see an Avatar Studios logo right here on some sort of a document, I guess, of some sort. We don't see what it is. He then pans away from the screen to what's behind the screen, which is his kind of cat resting on like a ledge or a wall or something like that. And that's the video. Now, on one hand, you would think that like, oh, it's just him just noting quickly that he's working on something Avatar Studios related. For a lot of other franchises, that might be just like, hey, the creator said something fun. But we're not used to this. Bryan or Mike have never done something like this before, where they've sort of basically teased something Avatar Studios related like this. They've been so cautious over the last 4 years in terms of not casually talking about Avatar Studios when they don't really have anything to say. They've really only talked about Avatar in any way on social media when the actual big news posts have gone around. They've usually kind of blogged one of the main kind of sites posting about something. When a book is announced or a comic is announced, that sort of thing. When a big press release goes out, which has been very few and far between for Avatar Studios, obviously. Bryan has posted when he's attended, like, say, Avatar in concert, which is, fine, fair enough. There's not too much to read into there. And the occasional kind of piece of fan art. I think Mike has done posted stuff even less about Avatar. So this is somewhat unique in terms of like, yeah, why today has he just randomly decided that like, yeah, I'll tease something on my screen that's Avatar Studios related, then pan to the cat. Is news coming soon? Because obviously we had the disappointment at CinemaCon where we felt we were going to get something, and we got the tiniest piece of news, but it really wasn't anything substantial. But there's still the idea that there's lots that needs to be kind of announced properly in the build up to stuff happening towards the end of the year into next year. So the creators beginning to maybe become a bit more open about talking about Avatar Studios is a good sign, hopefully, because, probably the most notable place where you can tell that they are just not willing over the last few years to talk about things is when they've gone on the Braving the Elements podcast. Those comments when Janet Varney asks them about hey, what's going on in Avatar Studios, you can tell they are so careful to not say anything. They only want to speak when they actually have something to say. So is there something behind this teaser? I don't know. We have a slight update potentially on this. When the Avatarist posted about this on Twitter, Daniel Richtman responded to it with the fingers crossed emoji. Now, Daniel Richtman is a sort of known kind of entertainment kind of industry kind of scooper, kind of he has good news most of the time, sort of exclusive news. So it's kind of one of those things where fingers crossed obviously means hopefully, but in a way it coming from him kind of makes it feel like there actually is something behind it, that maybe he's heard something, maybe for Avatar is coming sooner rather than later, and this post from Bryan maybe makes it feel like that's actually going to happen. Otherwise it's maybe just is it just him as a fan posting this? I'm not sure. It's obviously one of those ones where it's super hard to read into this massively, but it is a social media post that neither of the creators have done over the last 4 years, a teaser in some regard for Avatar Studios. So let me know what you think of this in the comments below, but we'll get on to the second piece of news. Kind of a bit of a controversial one here, as it's happened over the last day or so. Avatar Netflix will make live-action Toph more feminine. We'll get straight down to the quote, because I think we need to get into the actual core details here. The headline has basically been, Netflix Toph will be slightly more feminine. This is a quote directly from Toph's actress. Here's what she specifically said. My version of Toph is going to be a little older and slightly more feminine. I feel like I wanted to work into a very humanizing space for her because, she was a cartoon. And then she also says that she has met Michaela Murphy, Toph's original voice actress. They have a very similar take in terms of process, so on. Now, this has been the main headline, because ultimately this is what the reaction has been to. We all know already that she was going to be a little bit older than expected, mainly because all the characters are going to be older going into season 2 just because of production timeline stuff. So the accuracy is correct here, because they basically were casting a Toph to match Aang's age going into this season rather than have someone who is 12. So that's why we're having a, I guess, 14, 15-year-old Toph rather than 12. And that makes complete sense, because that's the age Aang is going to be here as well. They're basically going to have to write a bit of a time skip into the start of season 2, of course. But yeah, we'll talk about the second half of this in a second. This hasn't really been a particular part of the reaction, though some people have highlighted it. But it's definitely been these 3 words that's been the main headline. There has been, I think, an overreaction to this just with regards to, it feels like some people have just completely ignored that these 2 words are in front of the word feminine, and have just had this really strong, lacking in nuance reaction that is just, Toph isn't feminine at all. Why would you do this and go completely against her character by have her be feminine, like, at all? And obviously that's like a bit of an odd take on the character to say like that this shouldn't be there at all. It was never there ever. When this article kind of highlights, she has had moments like this, and I get it, like, it's not the core part of her character at all. These are just occasional moments that happen to show that there are more sides to her character. It is the nuance of her character. So in saying slightly more feminine, are we just saying that there will be a few more scenes like this? That we can maybe get to see more of that kind of noble lady Toph that she is capable of doing when she needs to? Or more of a leaning into this with Katara, that like she can be okay at times with, like, wearing makeup and, having more of a kind of girls' day out with Katara if she absolutely has to. Obviously, we still want to emphasize the core aspect of her character, what she's like most of the time. But them saying slightly doesn't negate that, obviously. Now, the other angle on this, perhaps maybe leaning into what's presented in, say, like this screenshot, is, do they mean slightly more feminine by maybe removing a few scenes that are on this side of her character, that almost more like slob side of her character, where, she's picking her nose and kind of throwing it away. She's like picking in between her toes, just openly out in the middle of everyone, spitting on the ground, that sort of thing. That sort of stuff where, like, are we just trying to be, the tonally Netflix Avatar, you would say, is just, it's a little bit more serious, like slightly kind of darker in tone in that way. So you're just trying to like bring the character in just like a little bit by just cutting off some of these slight kind of extreme maybe scenes. Maybe, but that is just speculation, because she doesn't really say what it is. But it's a vague statement where, like, just from a marketing standpoint, like, I don't think it's the article writer clickbaiting it. Like, it is the headline, I think, statement from what's going on here. But it's one of those ones where it's a vague statement that's just going to get people reacting. We saw this back in season 1. There was a lot of quite heavy reaction to stuff said in interviews. Now, ultimately, I think a lot of it ended up being relatively okay. Like, that reaction was fine, because once we saw season 1, we saw that, some of those changes you made weren't actually great. So, in that sense, I understand why there has been a reaction to this to a certain degree, because they are saying a change of some sort is happening to Toph in the live action. And I absolutely get why people would be very cautious and have doubts about that, because we all saw season 1, and that a lot of the changes didn't really work out for the best on the show. We get it, they have to make changes, but is this one that's going to be in the category of required, necessary, when we get to seeing the actual show? So, because it's so vague, I think this is why it probably doesn't maybe prompt as much of a discourse as there actually is. But yeah, this is what they're now going to have to encounter, I think, with especially the season 2 reaction, is that we now know there's not really that kind of excuse of just like, it's an unknown quantity, we have to wait and see. We obviously have to wait and see what the specific book 2 episodes are like, but we know what their approach has been to changes so far. So people have doubts, especially if you are on the more negative side of where you view season 1. So there's kind of that aspect to things as well. My ultimate thoughts on this are that depending on how they do this, it might not be super noticeable. Like if it is just like an extra scene along these lines, fair enough. If maybe, like I said, they just are cutting out some of the scenes where she would be in this scene required to like pick her nose or something like that. Okay, I get it. Maybe dropping that a little bit. I get it. That maybe leans into what she's maybe trying to get at with this second half of her statement, which I find to be a little bit confusing. I feel like I wanted to work into a very humanizing space for her. And the reason she's doing this is because she was a cartoon. And it's like, what are you trying to say here? I think the angle she's trying to get at here is maybe leaning into the idea, well, if you just try and transplant the cartoon into live action, word for word, scene for scene, shot for shot, it's not going to maybe tonally work as nicely as you think it should, because it is a cartoon, because it's in animation. This stuff works in that medium. Live action is a different medium, and because of that, some stuff will need to be adjusted. I think wording it as like, in the live action where I'm trying to very humanize her because she was a cartoon, it's a weird way to say that, in terms of like, I can absolutely see why some people are taking this and feeling it perhaps is actually maybe the more negative part of the statement overall, because it's vague. And this is where we do have to note that some of those interviews that came out in or around like season 1, some of the cast and crew were saying stuff like this, like weird statements where it just felt like you have just put your foot in your mouth when talking about like the original show. You probably shouldn't have said that. And then a lot of stuff, like I think just for the sake of the show and what the expected reaction from the fandom is, when you just really vaguely talk about changes you're making in an adaptation, that just seems like the perfect way to just create controversy within the fandom when you don't need to. As in, you are probably better off not talking about any change that you made in that scene and just seeing how people accept the scene when it comes out. Because when you say there is a change, but then don't actually say what exactly you've done, people run with the idea that, well, I'm assuming you're going to do that change badly, which obviously is a negative opinion, but, after season 1, it's like, do you have my full trust that you're going to do the changes correctly? And the idea is, like with a lot of people, not really. We've seen what the overall general sort of kind of critical response to the show has been. It was like clearly good enough to get it the season 2 and 3, but like not like best thing ever type situation here. So they do have to run with the idea that there is a sense that they need to impress people with season 2. Like people are expecting them to make improvements. And so something like this, especially when it comes to just to say that like marketing, almost media training point of view, it's like, I really don't want this to be what a lot of the marketing is in the build up to season 2, that it's just, oh no, they're doing the vague speak about all the changes and stuff like that. And when it's like, no, like have your set points that you want to do to really highlight the show and, talk positively about it. I understand like if people ask about changes, you don't want to just lie to them, but it's like, I think they maybe need to have some more trained answers in how to kind of respond to some of that stuff. Just because clearly these 3 words have spawned an entire online discourse. I think to a certain degree excessively so, but this was always going to happen when you make these statements about a kind of anticipated kind of upcoming thing. It is just the reality of how things are. Everything is going to be sort of picked apart. But I also would be aware that I think even if she maybe had explained herself better in terms of a lot more detail, you then have to deal with, one, how many people actually read the full article to read the full statement, and read that nuance, and how many people will just react to literally the 3 words. Now, in this case, on this specific topic, ultimately these 3 words are maybe the only real relevant ones, because the little older thing we already knew about, and I think people accept that. And then I think just a lot of people either don't really know what she's trying to get at here, or like it doesn't really mean anything. So it's just that sort of a situation. But yeah, I don't feel super strongly, like I said, about this. Like, my thoughts are more on sort of like reacting to the reaction to this, rather than myself having a particular opinion about it. I'm super middle of the road on season 1, where, like, if you watch my videos I did on it, I come out of that with the idea that I think it was fine. I thought it was okay. Wasn't a disaster. Wasn't amazing either. A lot of it was just very standard, middle of the road. A few standout scenes. A few scenes that were not great. Overall, just a like, yeah, I'll watch more of this. Hopefully it improves, but like, it's only okay. That sort of idea. So, I think in the broad scheme of things, I'm probably on maybe the slightly more positive end of things, coming out the other end of the season 1 reaction. But that's just where we're at there. In the end, at the end of the day, it ultimately only really matters what our thoughts are when we see the episodes. I think that is a big point that I do want to make in this. I think you have to some extent keep track of the marketing, just because it is the news about the thing, and if it's inevitably going to cause some reaction, I think you have to discuss it. But it's like, you shouldn't be forming super strong opinions, I think, on it right now, especially when it is such a vague statement here in terms of like slightly more feminine. Again, in what way? Is this just means there's more scenes showing this side of the character, less scenes showing a different side of the character, or is there some new element being added into the character that this just will be a very different version of Toph? I don't know. Because that's the thing. They're saying that like this version of Toph is going to be different than the animation by virtue of being a little bit older than when we first saw her in the original one, and slightly more feminine. And again, she does specify that. So in her mind, it is only a small thing. Now, obviously, people are I think, not giving the benefit of the doubt here, which I get, of like slightly more as in, are you underestimating this? Is it actually quite more substantial? But I do think it is a little bit unfair to interpret slightly more as just this doesn't exist, and they're now saying that the character will be very feminine, as in like we're just doing borderline of 180 with the character. That's not what's being said here. And that is the way I read some of the reaction to this, which is a little bit odd to me. Whereas my thoughts are always that, like, I think most of the ATLI characters are extremely nuanced, and they have these kind of multifaceted kind of aspects to them. Where sure, Toph is not the character you immediately think of when you think of feminine, but she has scenes that show that that's an element there within her character, even if it doesn't come out that often, you know, that idea. We're trying to have these kind of nuanced topics, but it's obviously hard to be super nuanced when it's such a vague statement here as well. So we're going to wrap it up there. Let me know what your thoughts are on this Netflix Avatar news, as well as, like I said, this potential teaser from Bryan about Avatar Studios stuff, whatever it means. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, but that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.